Hello, this is your good friend Colette. I'm making this video from beautiful Kenitra, Morocco. And obviously I have a haircut, so I look a little bit more human now. Today I'm going to be talking about a subject interesting to me, for the Canaanite people and in general, like with polytheists. And I have like a little bit of an analogy or like a parable. Mine is the parable of the sword and the belly. And it's about prejudice, let's say. Prejudice being the sword, and the belly is what it goes into. The thing that receives the prejudice. On my other channel, Kohan Colette's, this is Josh's Journeys. I'm assuming I'm posting it there first because of my ban for criticizing Israel. I said repeatedly that Christianity, as we have it, is inherently anti-Semitic on account of the Gospel of John. It's unambiguously, foundationally, unremovably, essentially anti-Semitic, because the Gospel of John is directed at Jew hatred of Jewish people, because the Gospel of John explicitly blames the Pharisees and the Jewish leadership for the death of Jesus, even though there is no such mention of these in the earlier synoptic Gospels, which are more honest in assigning blame to the Romans, who in fact carried out the execution of Jesus, of which there's absolutely no ambiguity about, mentioned in other sources. Any source essentially that mentions the historical Jesus mentions that he's put to death by the Romans. Okay, so concerning that, I think it's interesting how we as a society have chosen, let's say, which sword to block from which bellies, but some to just let them run through, because there's obviously a great deal of cultural disgust at anti-Semitism, and this is for good reason. No one should be subject to persecution and violence of the sword, let's say, on the basis of their religious beliefs, if their religious beliefs don't infringe on the belly of others. I fully embrace that. That's why I'm very impatient with those who actually have genuine anti-Semitic impulses on my channel. I try to make it clear that my critique is not of Jewish people per se, that I advocate violence against Jewish people ad nauseum, but rather against this malicious form of Jewish-coded fascism, which we call Zionism. And I level sort of like the critique for the reason of the Jewish condition in Europe being because of the inherent anti-Semitism present in the Gospel of John, in the Christian Bible. And some may say, oh, why are you so specific in targeting the Christians? There are such verses in the Quran that have directly anti-Semitic attitudes, let's say. They, like the story of Yom Qiyam, where the tree and the rock will say, I have a Jew hiding behind me, a Christian hiding behind me, I kill them. And I feel very much like this is a legitimate argument, although the material reality of Muslim civilization is not generally one of anti-Semitism. There's a mild sense of anti-Christian and anti-Jewish sentiment as a result of, let's say, an Islamic supremacism, rather that they think since Islam is the religion of state, Islamic people should receive preferential treatment in all cases, and that they are offended essentially at how high Christians and Jewish people rose in what was ostensibly a Muslim society. this was a major case for the downfall of the descendants of Samuel Hanaqid in Islamic Spain, and it led a reactionary Muslim movement against the Jews, not because of anything inherent about Jewish theology. In fact, Muslims and Jews are in variance about very little of theological matters, actually, considerably less than between Jews and Christians and Muslims and Christians, but rather a political divide created by a sense of Islamic supremacy, that is an Islamic state in such and such a city in Spain, Seville or whatever, that it should be Muslims who govern the state, not this Jewish vizier who should be prohibited on the basis of his religion. And this is actually a valid point, but it's not the same kind of anti-Semitism that we find in contemporary Europe, where it's an inherent anti-Semitism, where Jews are seen as a cursed people. They are seen as having committed the ultimate sin of having rejected Jesus directly, essentially, and having put him to death, which the Christians see as a theocide, the killing of God. Of course, also in Christian religion, this is God's plan the whole time, and it leads to salvation, which is one of the inherent moral contradictions about Christianity. They are judging a group of people for carrying out a plan that they believe God intended the whole time. So it seems mildly absurd. They want to have their cake and eat it too, with the free will thing. They want God's plan to be carried through, but they want to pretend that there's free will so that they can judge people. It's a hypocrisy, and I think inherent to monotheism, which brings me to my next point, which is the inherent contradiction between monotheism and polytheism, and the sword and belly relationship of that. So all the monotheistic religions, or at least the Abrahamic ones, have a very, very sharp sword directly stabbing into the belly of any polytheistic religion. They consider it a sin just to practice polytheism. In Islam, the biggest sin, the unforgivable sin, is polytheism. In Judaism, or in traditional Judaism, in the Bible, there is no ambiguity about this fact that there are multiple gods. If you read the Bible, they frequently reference the fact that other gods exist and have power, and that magic exists and has power, but it's a morally devious act to engage in magic or polytheism, because it's seen as a rebellion or even like an adultery, essentially, against the Israelite God Yahweh. And this is even in their world where, without any ambiguity, they believe that the gods of their neighbors exist, and in some cases even put them in an equal status to Yahweh. For example, in 2 Kings, there is the story of the abomination of Moab, as they say, where the kingdoms of Israel and Judah are warring against the kingdom of Moab, and they march on the capital, having conquered each of the cities in Moab, thinking that they would lay siege to the capital of Divan. And in the story, the biblical story, the king of the Moabites, Mesha, sacrifices his son to the abomination of Moab, which is the Israelite sort of, curse euphemism, like desecration of the Moabite god Chemosh. And of course, Chemosh, in this story, in the Hebrew Bible, in Tanakh, 2 Kings, defeats, overwhelms the Israelite God Yahweh. Not his army specifically, but the army as well, but specifically wipes the floor with Yahweh in the freaking Tanakh. And the Israelites are kicked the frick out of Moab. And the irony is, actually, of all the stories in the Bible, of all the stories that could be verified by history, could be verified by other primary sources contemporary to the events, which one was actually verified historically? Though really like the most embarrassing one, which was that one. Because they discovered the Mesha stele from Moab, which essentially gives the same account of the Bible from the perspective of the Moabites, and say that the Israelites were oppressing the Moabites, and that the god Chemosh overwhelmed the Hebrew god Yahweh, and the Moabites wiped the floor with the Israelites, which is like, wow, that's the one Bible story that's been confirmed by archaeology kind of like unambiguously from a secondary perspective, and it's the single most embarrassing one for Jews and Christians. It's the one that unambiguously kind of like says, well, polytheism is real and God isn't even the best. So he gets defeated by the desert god. Because Yahweh is actually like the desert god at that time. He's like a god of, not the god of Bronze Age sheep herders, the god of Iron Age farmers, as people have articulated. I am really fond of Useful Charts video about the tribes of Israel and the origins of Judaism. Him actually being a practicing Jew, but also subscribing to a scholarly and critical attitude to the history of the Israelites and the Jewish people, I think is very, very admirable, and I respect that a lot about him. And he deserves all the success he has on YouTube. He's an incredible person. I recommend you watch his video. They're so much more meticulous than me. I'm just blabbing. That gets it back onto the point. Well, polytheism, by the nature of all the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they have a big sword poking right into polytheism. They cannot tolerate it. And for some reason, when we talk about like the discourse, the modern day political discourse around intolerance, religious intolerance, it stops at monotheistic religions. We should say anti-Semitism is wrong. Of course it is. Islamophobia is wrong. Of course it is. But there is this reluctance to say that anti-polytheism is wrong. That anti-polytheism, while I think any equitable, intelligent person, when asked about the subject, will come to the conclusion that, yeah, it should be subject to all the same rights, considerations, and respect that any other religious tradition has, the polytheistic religions as a whole do not receive this. And I think this has also created problems, I think, directed against monotheists, because polytheists are so, sorted by get the sword in their belly by the monotheists. A lot of the most vicious abuses of BJP and the Hindutva movement are justified by the very real concern that issues of polytheists are so neglected by the global community, and polytheism and polytheistic religions are so neglected from the mainstream of international thought, even though there are so many polytheists and polytheistic religions in the world. They are not given the respect, and they are not given protection from persecution. And I think that ought to change. Personally, I have a great deal of disdain for BJP and their simmering, though there's a degree of warmongering against Muslims and anti-Muslim rhetoric and the hatred against Muslims. And I'm saying this as a polytheist myself. I think it's very important for us to recognize all religious traditions as being equally valid and providing protection for polytheists as well as monotheists. I think that's the limit of what I can do with my current channel, so sign off. Bye.